I live in a mountain village in Abruzzo, but this story is not from here. 2 hours to the south, in the province of Avellino, there is a bar on a small square that opens at 5:40 in the morning. I sat there last spring with a cup in front of me, and I watched 11 men come in and go out in the space of an hour. Not one of them sat down. They stood, they drank in 3 seconds, they left a coin, they walked out. And I thought about the men in my own family who did that same thing in a kitchen in Pennsylvania, standing up in 3 seconds, and never once explained why. Here is a date I want you to hold on to. 1933. That is the year a man named Alfonso Bialetti patented the little 8-sided aluminum coffee pot that you are probably picturing right now, the one that sits on the stove, the one that gurgles and spits at the end, the one that was in your grandmother's kitchen, on the back burner, stained brown inside, never washed with soap because washing it with soap was a sin. Now here's the other date, 1921, then 1924. Those are the years the United States closed the door, the quota laws. After 1924, the Great Migration from southern Italy was finished. It was over. So look at those numbers together. The pot was invented in 1933. Your family had already been in America for 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, which means something simple and strange. The coffee pot you think of as the oldest thing in your family had not been invented yet when your family left Italy. Whatever your great-grandmother carried in her head when she walked onto that ship, it was not that. It was something else. And almost nobody in America remembers what that something else was. That is what this is about. In the city of Naples, there was a coffee pot called the cuccumella. In dialect, people also said a cuccumella. It means more or less the little pot. And it did not work anything like the pot on your grandmother's stove. It came in 2 halves, one on top of the other, with a spout on one of them. You filled the bottom half with water. You put ground coffee in a metal basket in the middle. You put it on the fire. And when the water boiled, you did the thing that made this pot famous. You picked it up with a cloth because it was hot, and you turned it upside down. That was it. The water fell down through the coffee slowly, by its own weight. No pressure, no steam forcing anything, just gravity and time. It took 4 or 5 minutes to come down, and while it came down, you were supposed to wait and not touch it. It was not invented in Naples. The design came from France early in the 1800s, but Naples took it, kept it, and made it a Neapolitan object so completely that people forgot it had ever been anything else. In the city, it was on every stove. In the city. Here is where I have to be honest with you, because your family probably did not come from the city. Most of the people who left Campania for America did not leave from Naples itself. They came down to Naples to get on the ship. They came from the province of Avellino, from the mountains of Irpinia, from the province of Benevento, from the Cilento in the province of Salerno, from the province of Caserta, hill towns, farm towns, towns of 600 people, of 1,100 people, where the church and the square and the fountain were the whole world. And in those houses, there was very often no cuccumella. There was a pot, a small pot, a pentolino, the same one you boiled anything in. You put water in it, you put the ground coffee straight into the water, you brought it up to a boil, you took it off the fire, you waited for the grounds to settle to the bottom, and you poured carefully so they stayed there. That is boiled coffee. It is what poor people in southern Italy actually drank. It is thick and it is dark, and there is always a little grit at the last swallow, and everyone knew to stop drinking before that last swallow. If you ever watched an old relative pour coffee and then stop pouring while there was still some left in the pot, and you wondered why they wasted it, that is why. They were not wasting it. They were leaving the grounds behind. It was a habit from a kitchen you never saw. And now the part that is hardest to say out loud. For a great many families in those hill towns, coffee was not a daily drink. It was not a morning routine. It was a small luxury, and in some houses it was almost a medicine, kept for when someone was sick, or for when the priest came, or for Christmas. What the children drank was not coffee at all. It was barley. Caffè d'Orso barley coffee in the province of Avellino and everywhere around it. Barley grain, roasted dark in a pan until it was almost burnt, then ground, then boiled in water. It comes out brown. It smells roasted. It looks exactly like coffee in the cup, and it has no coffee in it whatsoever. Mothers gave it to children in the morning, sometimes with a little milk if there was milk, sometimes with nothing. And a child would sit at the table with the adults holding a cup of brown liquid, feeling entirely grown, drinking toasted barley. There were others. Chicory root, roasted the same way. Roasted chickpeas, roasted acorns in the very worst years, and there were very worst years. So think about the little boy or the little girl in your family who got on the ship. 8 years old, 11 years old. When they remembered the smell of home in the morning, it is entirely possible that what they were remembering was burnt barley. Why was real coffee so expensive in a country whose most famous port handled it by the ton? Because it never grew there. Not one bean. Every coffee bean that ever entered Italy came in on a ship, from Yemen, from Brazil, from the Dutch and British colonies, and every one of them was taxed. Naples was one of the great coffee ports of the Mediterranean. The sacks came off the boats at the harbor and went into the warehouses. But coming into the port and reaching a farmhouse 40 miles inland up a mule track are two entirely different journeys. A farm family in Irpinia in 1890 lived largely without cash. They ate what they grew. Money was for taxes, for the church, for shoes, for the doctor, and for passage to America. Coffee was a purchase. You bought it by the ounce in paper at the one shop in town, and you made it last. That is why there was a right way and a wrong way to serve it, and why the wrong way was an insult. That is why the cups were small. Everyone tells you the cups were small because Italians drink strong coffee. That is true now. Back then, the cups were small because coffee cost money. And when a family in that condition put a cup of real coffee in front of a visitor, they were not being polite. They were spending. Remember that the next time you think about your grandmother insisting that you take a cup before you leave the house. 7. Let me tell you exactly how it was made in one of those kitchens. Not a modern version, the real one. The fire is the cooking fire, low, with embers. There is no gas. The coffee has been ground that morning, or the night before, in a small wooden box grinder with a metal crank on top and a tiny drawer underneath that pulls out. Ground fine, but not powder. Water goes in the pentolino, not much. Enough for the cups you need and nothing more. The coffee goes straight into the cold water, roughly 1 heaping spoon for each small cup. There is no measuring, the hand knows. The pot goes on the embers, not the flame. It comes up slowly. You watch it, because the moment it lifts and starts to climb the sides, it goes over, and then you have lost the coffee and you have made a mess in the fire. The second it rises, you pull it off. You let it fall back. Some women brought it up a second time and pulled it off again. Some added a single drop of cold water at that moment to make the grounds drop faster to the bottom. That drop of cold water was a real technique, and different houses swore by different amounts. Then it rests, 2 or 3 minutes, off the heat, untouched, while everything settles. Then you pour, slow, low, close to the cup, and you stop before the end. Sugar, if there was sugar, went in the cup and not in the pot. And in many houses in the Cilento and in the Irpinia towns, a strip of lemon peel or a bay leaf was dropped into the pot with the water. Not for fashion. It softened the burnt edge of coffee that had been roasted at home by hand, because it was roasted at home. That is the piece that has fallen out of the story entirely. You did not buy roasted coffee, not in a village. You bought green beans, pale and hard and smelling like nothing, and you roasted them yourself. The tool was a small iron drum on a stand with a crank on the side. There's a name for it in different places, but everyone knew the shape. You loaded the green beans in, you closed the little door, and you set it over the fire and you turned the crank, and you kept turning. 15 minutes, 20, longer. If you stopped turning, one side burned, so you did not stop turning. Children did this job because children had time and adults did not, and because it was a job where you could sit down. If someone in your family used to say they hated the smell of coffee roasting, this is why. They spent their childhood in front of that drum with their arm going in circles and their face hot. You knew it was done by sound. The beans crack. There is a first crack and then later a second, finer one, and after the second one you had very little time before it was ruined. Then you poured them out to cool, and the whole street knew what your house was doing that afternoon because there is no hiding that smell. In a town of 800 people, coffee roasting was public information, and every family's coffee tasted slightly different permanently because every family roasted it slightly differently. That is a thing that cannot exist anymore. Your coffee and your neighbor's coffee come from the same factory now. The other thing that was not the same from town to town was who was allowed to drink it in public. In the towns of Irpinia and the Sannio, the bar and the Circolo, the little club with the card tables were male places. Men stood at the counter. Men played cards in the back. Men drank their coffee standing in the morning before going out to the fields, and again in the evening. Women drank coffee at home, with other women in the afternoon in a kitchen with the door open onto the street. That was not a lesser version. That was where the real conversation of the town happened, and everyone understood it, including the men. So when a family arrived in Philadelphia or in Brooklyn or in Providence and the men went to the corner store or the club or the barber shop and stood around drinking coffee while the women had their coffee in the kitchen with the neighbors, nobody had decided to do that. It was not an American thing they picked up. They had brought the entire architecture of it with them from a hill town in Campania, and it just kept running 3,000 miles away in a row house. Now put them on the ship. Naples, the harbor, the long wait in the port, the medical inspection, and then 12 to 14 days at sea. In steerage, the food was bad, and the coffee, if there was coffee, was terrible. And there are plenty of accounts that call it hot brown water. And then New York, and then eventually a job and a room and an American kitchen, and the first cup of American coffee. It was pale. It came in a cup the size of a soup bowl. You could see the bottom of the cup through it. It was made in a percolator, which boiled the same water through the same grounds over and over until it was bitter and thin at the same time, which is a very hard thing to accomplish. And in most places it came already mixed with milk, or with a lot of milk and sugar. For a person from Campania, this was not weak coffee. It was not coffee. There was no word for it. It looked like the barley drink they gave the children. You have probably heard an old relative complain about American coffee. Every Italian family has that story. It is usually told as a joke, as stubbornness, as the old man who would not adapt. It was not stubbornness. It was a real and specific shock. They had left a place where coffee was expensive, dark, tiny, and serious, and arrived in a place where it was cheap, pale, enormous, and drunk all day long out of a metal pot on a diner counter. The two things were not the same drink, and they never became the same drink. And here is the second date I want you to hold on to because it is the one that surprises people the most. 1948. That is the year in Milan that a man named Achille Gaggia put a lever-driven machine into a bar. Before that, the machines in Italian bars used steam pressure, and they had existed since about 1901, but they were rare, urban, and expensive, and what they made was not what you were thinking of. The Gaggia machine pushed hot water through the coffee at high pressure with a spring lever, and out came something nobody had seen before. A small, dark cup with a layer of golden foam sitting on top of it. The crema. That golden layer on top of an espresso, the thing every Italian bar is now judged by. the thing your relatives talked about with reverence, did not exist anywhere in the world until 1948. So take this in. Your great-grandmother, who left Campania in 1906, never in her life drank an espresso as we know it. Not once. Not in Italy, not in America, not ever. She could not have. It had not been invented. Everything you picture as the deepest, oldest, most Italian thing about coffee, the little cup with the foam on top and the machine hissing behind the counter, is younger than the Second World War. It is younger than your parents. What she drank was boiled coffee out of a small pot on the embers, or barley, and she drank it in a kitchen with a dirt floor or a stone floor, and she thought of it as a good day when there was any. Meanwhile, in America, the surrogates did not go away either. They came right along. Roasted chicory was sold in American shops, and it was cheap, and Italian families used it exactly the way they had used it at home, mixed in with the real coffee to make the real coffee go further. 1 part chicory to 3 parts coffee, 1 to 2 in a bad month. Then came 1929, and the bad months turned into bad years, and the Depression put every immigrant family in America back into a way of thinking they thought they had left behind. Coffee stretched with chicory. Coffee stretched with roasted barley. Ground boiled a second time, which everyone knew was bad, and which everyone did. There's a whole generation of Italian-American children born in America who grew up in the 1930s tasting coffee that was half something else, and who never knew because nobody said. You do not explain to a child that you are stretching the coffee, you just stretch the coffee. And if that child grew up to be your father or your mother, then the taste they were nostalgic for their entire life, the taste they said nothing else ever matched, was a taste that came from being poor twice, in 2 countries, 30 years apart. But the neighborhood also gave something back that the village never had. In the Italian districts of New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Newark, there were Italian grocers, and in the back or in the window of the good ones there was a roaster. A real one, gas-fired, turning, and it ran in the afternoon, and the smell went out the door and down the block. So you could buy coffee already roasted by the pound in a paper bag, ground while you waited. For a woman who had spent her girlhood turning a crank over a fire in Irpinia, this was not a small thing. This was a luxury so complete it barely registered as one. That is the part of the story that gets told backwards. We tell it as loss. They left the real thing and got the fake thing. But for coffee, for this one product, America was better and easier and cheaper than the village had ever been, and they knew it, and they used it, and they did not feel guilty about it. Then came the tins, coffee in a sealed can with an Italian name on the label and Italian colors, roasted in Brooklyn or in Boston by an Italian family. It was made in America for Americans of Italian descent. It was not imported from Italy, and it never pretended to be. That tin in your grandmother's cabinet was not a piece of Italy. It was a piece of Italian America, which is a different country and a real one. Now, the ritual. Because the ritual survived when nothing else did. The cup is small. It is always small, even when the coffee inside it is American coffee, even in 1970, even in a kitchen in New Jersey with wall-to-wall carpet. Somebody arrives. Before their coat is off, the pot is on. There is no asking. The question is not, do you want coffee, because that question does not exist. The question is, how much sugar? You do not drink it alone if there is anyone in the house. You do not drink it walking around. You sit or you stand at the counter, and for those few minutes, that is what you are doing, and you are not doing anything else. And in Naples, there is a thing people still talk about called caffè sospeso, suspended coffee. The story goes that a man who had money would pay for 2 coffees and drink one, and the other stayed on the books. And later somebody who had nothing could come in and ask if there was a suspended one. I want to be careful here. It is very hard to document how common this really was, and today it is partly a story Naples tells about itself. But it tells you what Neapolitans wanted to believe about coffee, which is that it is the smallest thing you can give a stranger, and that nobody should be without it. If your grandmother made coffee for every single person who came through that door, whether she liked them or not, whether she could afford it or not, she was doing that. She almost certainly could not have told you where it came from. And the pot, the 8-sided pot. When did it actually get there? The 1950s and the 1960s. That is when it arrived in Italian-American kitchens in real numbers, and it came 3 ways. It came in the mail in a package from a cousin in Italy, wrapped in newspaper, with a letter. It came in the suitcase of a relative who went back to see the town for the first time in 40 years in 1958, and came home with 3 of them in different sizes. And it came from the Italian import store on the avenue once there was a market for it. Bialetti sold enormously in Italy in those years, with an advertising campaign built around a cartoon of a little man with a mustache, and the pot went from being one product to being the object every Italian household owned. And the Italian-American families, following at a distance, wanting whatever the old country now had, bought it too. So the moka pot in your family is not an heirloom of the migration. It is a reunion gift. It arrived a generation after, when the family in America and the family in Italy found each other again and started sending things back and forth. Which, if you think about it, makes it more meaningful and not less. It is not proof that your family never let go of Italy. It is proof that they went looking for it again, deliberately, 40 years later, and that somebody on the other end sent it.